today, Countryfile has come to a place which is sometimes called the last wilderness in Europe, the Cairngorm Mountains in the Highlands of Scotland. And today, these mountains are facing the nearest thing to a crisis that they've ever known. Because as more and more people come to this near Arctic landscape to ski and climb and walk in the hills, they're breaking down the barrier of isolation that has protected its fragile ecology for thousands and thousands of years. These mountains inspire those who come to taste their wildness, including the Everest climber Chris Bonington.
There are a lot of wild areas in Scotland, but there's nowhere quite like the Cairngorms, because of course the Cairngorms are so high. I mean, they've got this vast 4,000-foot plateau area. And when you're in the middle of the Cairngorms, you really do feel that you're in the middle of a very wild, serious mountain area. And I think that's what's so very special about the Cairngorms. And I think it's very important that one can preserve for people in this crowded little island of ours places that really are wilderness, where people can actually have a sense of an adventure, and from that sense of adventure, the sense of freedom, of actual kind of spiritual uplift, if you like, that I think that gives. And I think that's just one of the reasons for preserving the Cairngorms as a wild area.
Below its snowline are the last remains of the ancient Caledonian pine forests. This untamed landscape is the domain of deer and grouse and rare birds of prey. The finest way to see the Cairngorms in all their wild magnificence is as the eagles see them, from the air. The Cairngorms lie in the northeast of the Highlands, roughly 22 miles wide and 15 miles long. The granite plateau, bleak and bare, is the most extensive area of land above 3,000 feet anywhere in Britain, and proposals have been made to designate the whole area a World Heritage Site. Because of its remoteness, this is a landscape that has largely escaped the attentions of the human race. But in one corner of this forbidding place, the imprint of man can be clearly seen. This is a car park. Together with another one a mile away, it can take 1,200 cars and 55 coaches. And leading from here to the higher slopes is a network of steel and wire and fencing, the equipment needed for the fast-growing sport of skiing. To some conservationists, all this is an unforgivable scar, but to skiers, their sport could not exist without it. Last year, skiing was possible on only 84 days. The skiing and the company which runs the chairlift are controlled by the Cairngorm Recreational Trust.
The Cairngorm ski area is the priority area within the Cairngorm Mountains. Now, to get things into perspective, we occupy something like 8 square kilometres. That's about 1,500 acres. The Cairngorm Mountains themselves cover about 500 square kilometres. It's an enormous area, and we're the only area that's designated for skiing within that. As well as that, we provide a very important part of the economy of the area. Essentially, without skiing, there wouldn't be a year-round tourist industry in the Spey Valley.
But others apart from the skiers lay claim to these mountains, and plans to extend the ski slopes into a new area half a mile away, known as Lurchers Gully, have alarmed scientists, walkers, climbers and conservationists alike. They have bonded together to start a Save the Cairngorms campaign, fearful that any development in Lurchers Gully would destroy its unique character. At the moment, it's not an easy place to get to, and they want to keep it that way. They worry that opening up Lurchers Gully will be the thin end of the wedge.
What Scottish mountains are are a resource of wild country, among other things, but they are extremely vulnerable because the soils and vegetation are easily damaged by treading of feet, say of walkers, skiers, whatever. They are protected by the fact that it is rather difficult to get to some of the more vulnerable and valued areas. And if we allow this kind of development to go on, we will be forced to start doing things like putting turnstiles at the foot of the road here into Glenmore. It will come to that very soon.
But to stop people getting onto the mountains?
Because the mountain can't carry the burden. The mountain can't carry the pressure. We can't deal with the erosion problems that develop, the damage to vegetation, the disturbance to wildlife. And the overall loss is very great to the public at large.
Until now, skiing has been confined to just one area. Nearly 10 years ago, the Chairlift Company applied to extend beyond these jagged ravines known as the Northern Corries into the much more skiable Lurchers Gully, but their plans were turned down. Now they've come up with new proposals which they say should quell the fears of the conservationists. But they still need to put up chairlifts and more ski tows.
You can't build a ski area without installing ski lifts. But the techniques that we use now, compared with the techniques that we used 30 years ago when we first developed the area, we did use bulldozers 30 years ago. It was a very expensive way of doing it, but the technology wasn't there then. We now know that we can do the same thing by using snow fences. If we put a snow fence in the wrong place, we can take it away again and leave no trace. As far as the vegetation in Lurchers is concerned and the geomorphology, which is one of the interesting features, it's interesting, it's accessible because of the presence of the ski road, but none of the features in Lurchers is unique, and the NCC have confirmed this. They can all be found elsewhere in the Cairngorms. The difference with Lurchers is that they're easily accessible because of the existence of the ski road.
So the company believe they've learnt their lessons and their new equipment would blend in much more sympathetically with the landscape. And they say their plans would not bring in extra hordes of skiers. On a good day, the mountain has up to 7,000 of them, but their numbers are limited by the amount of car parking space, and that would not be increased. Their plans do, however, envisage a link road from the car parks right into Lurchers Gully. It would only be open to shuttle buses and closed completely out of season, but Drennan Watson isn't convinced.
Well, when it comes down to it, a road is a road is a road, and a single-track road can carry large numbers of people. You can say, well, we'll only take skiers. Well, there you're in the situation of taking very large and growing numbers of cross-country skiers. Are you going to stand at the end of the road and say, you're a walker, you stay here and walk, and we'll drive along the road with skiers? You lead to all sorts of problems of conflict. And most important of all, you intrude into an area that has a marvellous feeling of wild country, practically the only one like this in the high mountains of Britain, where the walkers can go in and get this feeling and this experience.
The Cairngorms are also one of Britain's toughest training grounds for mountaineers.
You cut the channel down here.
Up till now, the climbers have coexisted quite happily with the skiers, but they see the plan to open up the mountain as a threat to the isolation that they seek. So they've joined the Save the Cairngorms campaign. On training sessions like this, some of Britain's greatest mountaineers, Chris Bonington among them, have got their taste for the sport and mastered the skills that took them to the top of the world. Conditions here can be almost as hard as any that climbers can come across. The challenges set by their sport are best enjoyed in areas that are well away from other people. And like the conservationists, they're certain that much will be lost if the scheme for Lurchers Gully goes ahead.
I can understand the feelings of the skiers. I've skied at Aviemore and I've thoroughly enjoyed skiing there. The problem is, though, that what's been happening in the Cairngorms in the last 10, 20 years is a steady nibbling effect at this wild wilderness. And the Lurchers Gully project is yet one more bite of it. It's actually pushing a road, it's pushing ski lifts up towards Corrie into what has been, up to now, a kind of a wild, unspoilt area. And I think there's a certain point where one has got to say no. One has got to say that this is a wilderness area that we are going to protect. And wilderness means that it is wilderness, that you you reduce, you limit the hand of man.
So the interests of the conservationists and the skiers really are in conflict here in the Cairngorms. So how does a conservationist who loves skiing come to terms with this dilemma? Well, one such person is our very own Chris Baines. Answer that, Chris.
Well, I'm very much a novice. Until this time last year, I'd never skied in my life, and then I had a nice sunny week in the Alps, and I'm completely hooked on it. But it worries me a lot to know that almost wherever I go skiing, I'm going to be contributing to really serious environmental damage.
And is there anything you can do about it?
Well, I don't think there's anything that the individual can do, really. It's really up to the people who organise these places, who install the ski facilities, to do a much better job. And this particular slope's a very good place to see the kind of damage that people like me are doing. Skiing really is great fun, and it gives huge numbers of people a lot of pleasure and a taste for the mountain tops too. I love it. OK, I am a passionate conservationist, but there's no way I'm going to give up my skiing. So I think we have to do a much better job of bringing the two together. Apart from everything else, I want to stop feeling so guilty while I'm enjoying myself. At the moment, ski slopes everywhere look appallingly scarred and ugly in the summer. So for a start, long before the snow wears as thin as this, the ski companies must stop people like me using it.
This is the same slope when the snow has gone, and conservationists like Chris Baines claim the damage done by skiers is irreparable. Vegetation takes years to grow at such high altitude, and once it's been destroyed, soil erosion is bound to follow. But the economics of running a ski area are fragile themselves, and pressure is intense to ski on every available day. If the vegetation goes, the snow will not lie so well on barren rocks. In the long run, it could be the ski company that has the most to lose.
We've taken it on ourselves since 1965 to do a lot of reseeding work to stabilise areas where erosion might start, where there are bare patches on the ground. This is something we've been doing where we've really been ahead of the field. When we started, nobody knew anything about reseeding and soil stabilisation at high altitude. And we've been the pioneers. We've been doing it for 25 years now.
The final decision on the future of Lurchers Gully lies with the government's Scottish office, but it could be another winter before the result is known. Big guns are lining up on both sides. The Nature Conservancy Council for Scotland is against any skiing there. The Highlands and Islands Development Board is for it. There are 3 weeks left for everyone involved to make their feelings known. The conflict over skiing has become part of a much wider debate about the way the mountains should be managed for the future. Jim Hunter is director of the Scottish Crofters Union, and he took me to a lonely glen in the shadow of the Cairngorms. He hopes that future plans will correct the errors of the recent past. Less than a generation ago, this glen was a place where families lived and worked, but now their crofts are derelict. To Jim Hunter, this is not wilderness, but man-made desolation.
People think of the Cairngorms as a very wild area, and the high hills are very wild. They're one of the few wilderness areas left in the UK. But all around them and in the rest of the Highlands, we have many places like this, where there are the ruins of former habitations where people lived not all that long ago. And throughout the Highlands, it's like that. The place is one of the few parts of Europe where there are far fewer people living today than there were 100 years ago. And people here feel strongly about that. And when conservationists talk rather sweepingly about the Highlands as being Europe's last wilderness, it does cause resentment, because we know that very much of the area was inhabited by our people, if you like, and we'd like to see living communities continue to flourish in this area.
But how do you bring the people back? How do you persuade people to live in the wilderness?
Well, they don't need much persuasion, actually. In fact, one of the problems in many parts of the Highlands at the moment is that such is the demand for crofts, small farms, that the price has gone beyond the reach of local people. And so, at the moment, anyway, there is every indication that there can be flourishing communities in these localities.
It seems tragic that these crofts no longer ring to the sound of family life. But elsewhere in the Highlands, a new kind of crofter is taking over, still often keeping animals, but maybe working at a word processor as well. Jim Hunter believes that in glens like this, there is great potential for sport, tourism, and for people.
I think we need a policy that is geared up to take account of all these things and is certainly concerned, obviously, with the ecology of the area, with preserving it as a very spectacular place for people to look at for wildlife and so on. But we also need recognition of the fact that people live here, that more people could live here, and that they could live here in a way that would not damage the environment. And we need policies that are designed to take account of that. And it is not sufficient just to be totally negative about it and say there should be no development. What's important is to get the right sort of development, the sort of development that can make use of the area's resources without destroying them in the process.
The resort of Aviemore is, to many eyes, the wrong sort of development. It serves the skiers and holidaymakers who come to the Cairngorms, and its critics say it just grew without thought. A town of shops, hotels and cafes, like any other tourist centre, with little in common with its highland roots.
I would be dishonest to say I like the way it's been developed. I think if there had been better mechanisms for the control of development, we would have had a more attractive Aviemore. It would have housed just as many people, but it could have been done more attractively. Having said that, it does make a great contribution to the economics of the Spey Valley and gives an awful lot of opportunity to an awful lot of people to enjoy the Cairngorms, and that one must welcome. But there is a need from Aviemore right up into the Cairngorms, up the Glenmore approach to the Cairngorms, for an improvement of the management of recreation because of the numbers of people who are coming here and the type of recreation they're seeking.
Because of the demands being made on the mountains, the government has asked the Countryside Commission for Scotland to look into methods of managing places like the Cairngorms. That report is already overdue, mainly because of internal wranglings about just how that management ought to be carried out, but it should soon be published. With so many people now wanting access to the hills, it's quite possible the report will recommend some system for limiting their numbers.
The mountains as a whole are not full, but there are certain areas of them and certain sports that are using them, in this case skiing, where there may be a necessity to say, well, in this area, in this place, for skiing, the house is full.
The Commission has already come out against any extension of the skiing, and their report is bound to intensify the debate and beg the question, whose mountains are they anyway?
I think everyone has got the right to see it, and the more people who go to see it on their own 2 feet, the better. The problem is, though, if you actually make it too easy to go in by having a series of roads and so on, you're actually losing this very, very essential area of wilderness. Having lived in the Lake District for about, 25 years now, I feel that the Lake District National Park has worked extremely well. And looking at what's been happening in the Cairngorms, there does seem to have been a lack of a clear-cut policy for the whole of the Cairngorms. There's been a whole series of different interests, be it the skiers, be it the deer stalkers, be it the mountaineers, the conservationists, and so on. And it's a pity that all these interests couldn't be brought together, that a clear-cut policy could be made, and maybe this would help both to protect the Cairngorms and also give the various interest groups the share of enjoyment and fulfillment that they deserve.
So, would turning the Cairngorms into a national park solve the problem? Many people south of the border might be surprised to hear that Scotland has no national parks. At the time they were being set up in England and Wales, it was felt unnecessary to have them in Scotland. The argument was that Scotland's vulnerable places were so remote that no harm would come to them. But 40 years on, the world has changed. Now the Cairngorms are less than 3 hours' drive from Glasgow and closer than the Alps for many British skiers and mountaineers.
What matters here isn't hill walkers or downhill skiers or bird watchers or whatever. It is the interests of the public at large, the nation at large, and its value it places on a fine area like the Cairngorms, because this is the finest wildlife and wild area we've got.
Ironically, the Cairngorms could have been bought for £200,000 40 years ago. If they become a national park now, there are Scots who'd want it publicly owned, not left in the hands of private landowners.
That is the one issue that very many of the people that deal with these matters tend to skirt round because, of course, it's very politically sensitive. But it is very difficult, really, to have meaningful control of what happens in a big geographical area like this if you do not actually own the land that it consists of. And certainly national parks in other areas of the world almost always imply public ownership of the land within the park boundaries. That's the case in the United States and in much of Western Europe. And I find it personally very difficult to see how there can ever be meaningful control and a sensible strategy for the Cairngorms without a measure of public land ownership of the area.
Obviously, areas like the Cairngorms are under enormous pressure at the moment, and they need something done urgently. And I'm quite certain that we'll be recommending that some form of designation, whether it's a strengthening of existing designations, our national scenic areas, or the introduction of a special park, or a national park even, I think we'll have to come up with some recommendation of that sort to allow a different approach, a more positive approach to the management of all these different conflicting interests that I've been mentioning. Plus that indefinable use and love by those who never go near the Cairngorms but love to know they're there, love to look at them from a distance. When you take all this demand of the public, there's a need to look at how they can be managed for the future for our children. Because if we go on as we're doing at the moment, they're going to be overexposed to human pressure, and that will destroy something which is of vital importance.
The tens of thousands who come to the Cairngorms to ski probably wonder what all the fuss is about. They're making use of nature, enjoying themselves, and bringing business to a remote part of Britain. The Cairngorms, they say, have room for everyone. But that may not be true anymore. The decisions made in the months to come are going to have a profound effect on the future of this wilderness as a place where men and mountains meet and exist together. Next week, Countryfile takes on a new look, and this is part of it. It's our Land Rover Discovery, and it's going to be taking us all over the United Kingdom as we report on the latest happenings in the countryside. Now, because we're a program about life out of doors, we don't often find ourselves anywhere near a studio. So this will be my base as we head across Britain. We'll continue to examine the issues that affect people who live, work, or just spend their leisure time in the countryside, and the way we care for the animals, the livestock, the wildlife that share it with us. Among our new features, there'll be Countryfile Update, a review of the week's news in farming, the environment, and the countryside. Well, that's our new look, all starting next week.